Welcome. This is the Living a Revenue Culture podcast. For those who've been with us before, you know living a revenue culture is where you maximize your profits because you optimized your people. And we're in a transition in this podcast because we started out for 2.5 years. This was the Revenue Games podcast, and we focused on the context of generating revenue. But the start of this year, the revenue game became part of TTI Success Insights. And TTI Success Insights, what they're really good at is helping us optimize the people. So as we go forward, we're in a bit of a transition. I think you're going to find it really exciting. And an example of that transition is, this is the first time we've ever done a podcast where we're making it a two-part. You're going to find in a few minutes here as you get to know Andrew that even two parts may not be enough, but you have to draw a line someplace. So this one will be a little different. And, so enjoy it because I think the learnings are just going to be spectacular. Okay, Andrew, we're here now for the second half of our joint podcast. You're our first two-session guest, and the first one was spectacular. So anybody who didn't see the first one, make sure you go see it. Watch this one first, but then go back and get the first one because you'll see a lot of overlap and consistency and leverage, all those good things. And today, the details we want to get into today, this one word keeps flashing in front of me, Andrew. It's trust. And the other thing that flashes in front of me is making sales the most trustworthy profession on the planet. And when I first read your profile and that's what you were doing, I was trying to figure out if you were kidding or, because that isn't how lots of people think. I work with engineers and programmers and coaches, and they go, sales, oh no, I don't want to do that. They think of it as the opposite of trustworthy. So I think we're all going to be really interested to learn more. And I guess part of this session can also deal with, because you have done work in stories and integrity, and you have a phrase. We talked about habits in the last one, but you talk about habits of high performers. So as we explore this area, should we start with what's it mean to make sales the most trustworthy profession on the planet and the other things as support? Or should we talk about the other things leading to the mission?
Let's start with that first one, because I think it's a provocative thing to say. I personally think it's a worthwhile way to spend my life, and here's why. I think we can all agree, and every survey I've ever seen says, by reputation, stereotypically, salespeople, and especially insurance salespeople or secondhand car salespeople, are known to be the least trustworthy profession. But doctors and nurses, on the other side, are the most trustworthy profession. And I got curious about, why is that the case? Is it only because salespeople have behaved badly and have earned the reputation, or is something else going on? And I think that, yes, there's been some bad behavior, but of course there has in every industry. So why do we have this stereotypical view in sales? And I believe the answer is because as salespeople, we smell. And what I mean by that is, to other people, we smell as if we have a self-interested motive. Because everyone knows salespeople are paid commission. And so we think when we meet a salesperson, they just want to sell us something we don't need at a price we can't afford on a time frame that feels uncomfortable. And they're doing it because they want to make money, whereas nurses and doctors are doing it because they care about us. And so I think we're set up for failure by the way that compensation has been designed. And I'm no advocate for removing commission-based payment systems. I think it nicely immunizes the company and aligns a company and a sales force, but it does have a consequence. And if you want to feel that consequence, think about walking down your favorite main street and you're surrounded by strangers. How much do you trust strangers? Most people say, scale of 1 to 10, about a 5.
Yep.
How much do you trust co-workers? Most people say maybe a 7.
Yep.
How much do you trust your family? 9, 10. How much do you trust salespeople? 2. Now you're on the street and you see some young people in the same t-shirts with clipboards smiling at you, making eye contact. How do you feel? Most people turn tail, walk the other direction, take out their cell phone, prepare their excuse, speed up. That's what it's like to be approached by a salesperson. And here's why I think it's a shame. Many salespeople, I believe, are actually in this game to help. And the way I define sales, we use this at the Kellogg Sales Institute and in my business habits at work, and many others choose this too. We say sales is the beautiful privilege of helping another human being make progress in their lives, with or without your product. And that's a noble profession. It deserves trust. So there's this inconsistency between what the best salespeople do and are committed to and how we're seen. So we've got some work to do, hence my life mission.
Wow. And please talk a little bit about Kellogg. I know who Kellogg, I've been a fan of Kellogg for years, but maybe not everybody does. And so when you talk about doing this with Kellogg, this isn't like you're doing it down at the diner with whoever's sitting in the booth. Give a little background to what you've done there and who Kellogg is.
Yes, well, as many people will know, the Kellogg School of Management is one of the leading business schools associated with the University of Northwestern here in Evanston, north of Chicago. And I'm very privileged to be part of the Kellogg Sales Institute, one of the very few business school-based sales institutes. And you might say, well, why is that the case? And the answer is, for many years, sales was considered to be a trade, not a profession, based on natural charm, not research. And we beg to differ. So my friend and colleague, Professor Craig Wortman, established the Kellogg Sales Institute. I'm one of several faculty, and our mission is, amongst other things, to ennoble the sales profession and to teach people that wonderful skill of speaking another human being's preferred future into existence, helping them make that progress however they define it. And is it based on research? Tons of it. So are there wonderful commercial sales systems? Yes, of course. Sometimes they're based on an individual's own life and experience, and that's wonderful. Our choice at the Kellogg Sales Institute, because of the esteemed institute from which we come, says we wanted to look at what does all the behavioral psychology research say about how humans think and feel and act and buy and give trust and withdraw trust. And can we build a sales approach that is customer-centric? Everyone says that, but built from the foundation of trust up. And here's why I think that matters. I believe you can take to the bank the rule that says customers first decide that they want to buy from you, the human in front of them, before they decide if or what they want to buy from your company. And if that's true, the only job you have to do is to sell or to present yourself as someone worthy of trust. And there are so many myths about how trust is built, given, and withdrawn, that that's worth digging into. But the primary job to do to restore the profession's reputation, I believe, is to teach salespeople how to actually be worthy of trust, and then how to be perceived as trustworthy. Two different problems.
Wow.
So that's what the Kellogg Sales Institute is all about.
Wow. I want you to talk about those two things, but before that, I don't want to lose, as you were describing the purpose, the mission of making people's worlds better as a salesperson. And I'm guessing your first day, when somebody walks into your classroom or your executive center, wherever it is that you are, and you say that, knowing you, I'm guessing you're watching their body language when you deliver that. I imagine you see some very interesting nonverbal responses. Is that true?
Absolutely. And for a lot of people, simply saying sales is this noble profession of helping others make progress does not undo 40 years of ingrained reputation damage. So there's some work to do. And one of the things I say, which I wouldn't say all leaders appreciate, but I believe it to my core, that to lead is to sell. And to sell is to lead. They are the same set of fundamental skills and habits applied to customers or your employees, helping both make progress in their lives, ideally towards a vision and an aligned mission that you have. But it is a very similar skill set. And so, dare I say, getting good at sales prepares you for leadership. Getting good at leadership prepares you for being extraordinary in your life with humans outside of work. So who wouldn't want to develop their skills of selling, helping?
Yeah, and you're, as you define it as having a link to leadership, one of the things, and I know you've read all the books, but in books like the Challenger Customer, where they talk about when you sell in a enterprise B2B world, you don't sell to a person, you're selling to groups of people and teams of people. And I think their average sale, they believe, is like 7.65 humans in every transaction. Whatever that number is, it's a bunch of people. Mm-hmm. And most of the time, they're not even all conversant on why you're there. You have legal in the room, and you have procurement in the room, and sometimes you have finance in the room, and you got all these people who are there for compliance reasons or risk reasons, but you're there to help them grow, but they're worried about the risk side. And so you're making me realize that the salesperson's role is to be a leader of that group in order to pursue a better outcome, a better state of their business, a better future. Am I on the right page?
I believe that to my core. And part of the job is helping them figure out what to do, which may or may not include your product. If it does, wonderful. You may have then earned the right to help them convince other stakeholders in these enterprise behemoths where you need a lot of people on board. And I don't think the sale finishes when you sign the contract, because for most products, the ROI comes not from the purchase, but from the usage. And there is a sale to be done post-sale, which is making sure that the product you've sold gets utilized as it should, and people adopt it, knowing they would prefer to carry on doing what they've always done, the habits they have, versus adopting your new system or new approach. That's a habit change problem. And salespeople are, in a sense, habit designers as much as they are leaders, as much as they are salespeople.
I don't know if you could see, as you were telling that story, I had a physical reaction to the story, because I realized in my sales career, people have often asked, what's your proudest moment? My proudest moment was a client, my first $1 million deal. And I went to see them after the deal, and I knew they were having trouble. And so, I went, and I knew they were having trouble. And I'm in the office with the vice president, and I asked him, I said, how's it going, Mel? He goes, terrible, terrible. He says, but I also know it's my fault. He says, you told me what was going to happen if I did this. Well, I did that, and it did happen, and it's terrible, but I'm going to fix it. And, it was that afterwards and that teaching that was so much more important than just getting the transaction, because they ended up buying millions more because they learned how to actually apply it. They learned how to apply new habits. And his habit that he had not done was every morning he'd come in, he'd grab his people and take them off the system and put them on a traditional how you do your work job. And then they'd never go back to the system. So he bought this $1 million system that nobody ever went back to and used. And he knew it was his habit he had to change.
Yeah. And
thank you for that.
As I listen to your story, if it's not obvious to everyone listening, there was a habit that you practiced in that sale, which was full disclosure, customer. If you don't do X, Y, and Z, this won't go well. And we know customers tend to listen to what they want to hear, which is, I just buy it, plug it in, and it'll work. And the sales motions that have destroyed trust are the ones where we make big promises like, just buy this thing, it'll be magical. And it never is.
No.
There's no product, or very few, that have magical results.
Yes.
And you were demonstrating what it looks like to be a trustworthy salesperson, to say, there will be challenges, this will happen, and I'll be there when it happens. And you showed up when it happened.
Yeah. Well, the first session we talked about habits, and it's now clear in that case where the human who was working, it was a CAD/CAM system, the human who was working on the terminals, they didn't get a chance to build good habits because the organization kept pulling them away. And, reinforce the old habits instead of, helping them learn the healthy new habits. So that was interesting. So go a little deeper. You were talking about the two different approaches earlier. Go a little deeper in that, please.
Well, if we look at which habits we can practice as salespeople that build trust, there's quite a few myths that I think we tell ourselves, for which we have evidence, that lead us into how we might change our behavior and change the reputation we have as salespeople. And one of the things we tell ourselves is trust takes time to build. And we've all had that experience, especially in an enterprise sale. We work on it for 18 months before we close the deal. And a lot of that felt like we were just building trust.
Mm-hmm.
And I have salespeople relook at this thing to say, when you thought you were building trust, what almost certainly was happening is you were climbing out of a trust hole you didn't know you stepped into, or you didn't know you were put into, because you blew your first impression.
Yeah.
And how did you do that? You showed up and you said, "Hi, Rick. My name is Andrew, and I'm the head of sales from," or worse, "I'm a business development executive," pretending I'm not in sales. And I put up a little flag that says, "I'm part of that profession that no one trusts." Want to have a conversation? Instead of doing the really great work of establishing yourself as an interesting human with purpose and passion, a reason why you do what you do, other than what people assume,
Yep.
that you're doing it for self-interested financial reasons. So you don't occur for them as someone with what's been called commission breath. You smell like someone who cares about them. And that's all to do with the very simple, but I would argue badly done job of designing your first impression, introducing yourself, sharing who you are, and making connections. That small talk turns out to be very big talk, because all the research in trust says most people have decided whether or not you are trustworthy in milliseconds to minutes, based on the micro moments, not the magnificent gestures. And they're looking to answer the question, who are you as a human, and what do you want? And unless you answer those questions of sincerity up front, they're not going to believe a word you say about how competent you and your company is, how reliable you are, your track record. And when you see that, it makes it so obvious why showing up to a customer and saying, "Rick, let me tell you all about our business and the offices we've got and our client base, and look at all these wonderful logos." And it's all about track record and competence, but they haven't decided that they trust you yet. So they're disbelieving everything you say. And some people say, like, "Of course, Andrew, trust is important, but is it really that important?" And my response is to ask people, think of a pie graph, a pie of all the knowledge you have in the world, every fact and figure you've ever learned, your view on climate change and religion and politics, what you know about science and nature, like all of it, billions of facts. How many of those facts did you go and discover firsthand, really firsthand? You drilled the ice cores, did the analysis and said, "Yes, I believe in climate change," versus you believed a teacher, a parent, a scientist, a journalist, a boss. And at least for this person, I don't think more than 0.1% of everything I know, I discovered for myself.
Yep.
And even if it's only 5%, it still speaks to a rule which I think you can take to the bank, which is, first, human beings decide whom to trust. And that determines what we believe. So job number one is to earn the label trustworthy. And the beautiful irony is being deemed to be trustworthy and actually being worthy of trust are two very different things. And when we make the mistake of assuming they're the same, that's where we get into trouble.
Talk about the being worthy of trust. I mean, that sounds like, oh my gosh, how do I do that? I mean, I bring myself and my bag of literature or my website or whatever I bring, but how do I cross that bridge?
Yeah, well, I think the answer to this one is kind of obvious. You tell the truth, you have good intentions for your customer success, and you keep your promises. Those three things are worthy of trust. However, they're not the things that people use as signals to decide if you are trustworthy, because those things are only demonstrated down the line in a relationship. If I haven't had you say, Andrew, I think you're trustworthy based on how you look and how you say hello and how you introduce yourself, that thin slice that we judge other people on, often at the level of our subconscious. If I haven't decided you're worthy of trust, you don't earn the right to actually prove that you're worthy of trust. So I make this distinction. I say to salespeople, do you tell the truth? Of course. All of it? You're transparent? Yes, we do. Do you have good intentions? Yeah. Really? Are you in it for your customer or for your commission? No, we're in it for our customer. Great. Do you keep your promises? Yep, I do. Sometimes I make promises and the customer success team blow it, but mostly I keep my promises. And my response is, congratulations, you have integrity. And boy, is that trustworthy or worthy of trust. That's the good news. The bad news is those aren't the criteria that your prospects use. They use false signals when they're looking at you. They're looking at how you're dressed. Do you make eye contact? Are you smiling? Do you hide yourself with your body language? Do you do the obvious things that they're expecting you to do when they smell a salesperson in the room? Like, Rick, I see those pictures of your kids on your desk. And I was looking at your profile on LinkedIn. We went to the same school. And then when it comes to introductions, as I said earlier, the habit we're in is identifying ourselves as salespeople, members of the least trustworthy profession.
Oh.
Now, I'm not saying lie about what you do. I am saying, instead of saying, my name is Andrew, I'm the head of sales, I'm so happy to be here. I hope that we can talk about our product and that we'll end up doing business together. You're already selling and I've only just met you, versus saying something like, my name is Andrew, and I've had the privilege of working in sales for 3 decades. But 6 years ago, I realized without trust, phenomenal sales skills are very, very difficult to execute. And so today, I help sales leaders and salespeople become the most trustworthy person in every room. It's wonderful to meet you. I'm sharing why I do what I do and why I'm passionate about it and why I'm humble for the privilege of the impact I get to have versus name, rank, and serial number.
But the other thing I love about the way you did that was you're almost, I mean, I'd have to almost be brain dead not to want to ask you, how do you do that? What does that look like? How would I experience that? Which I think is probably part of what you want to have happen.
Yes, because none of us like being told what to do. It's why so many of us don't want to meet with salespeople, because it feels like somewhere between an interrogation and a fire hose being pointed at us. It's either, let me tell you all about our product and our company and me, and enough about me, let's talk more about me. Or it's, I want to know what your pain is and do you have the budget? And it's an extraction. And either way, it doesn't feel lovely to be on the other end.
Yep.
So can you be the kind of salesperson that people want to spend time with? Because you listen with your heart and you ask questions and then shut up. and because you are clearly someone who has a why behind what you do.
Yeah.
And so I look to a model of being a great salesperson as those kinds of people that we admire for being wonderful human beings, like Nelson Mandela from my own country. I
Yes.
think he was the ultimate salesperson. He
Yeah.
convinced 50 million people to a peaceful transition and dismantling of apartheid that every other country's transition on the planet had predicted would lead to civil war, and we got through it peacefully. That's a sale.
Yeah. So one of the things I've asked a question to now probably 20,000 CEOs on this this concept of trust. And the question is, if you had a grandchild that worked for a company that you didn't trust, and your grandchild was selling a product for this company you don't trust that was $20,000, would you buy a $20,000 product from somebody you trust who works for a company you don't trust? Nobody's raised their hand and said yes yet.
Yeah.
How do you coach or teach people when they're in integrity, but they're in a company? And car dealers, I hate to say this, I love buying cars. And when I was in Michigan, I had dealers I trusted, and I'd buy sometimes 2 or 3 cars a year for kids or whatever. But down here in Arizona, I finally found one I trust after 30 years this year. And I don't trust the dealership. And I don't trust the person. The process is broken. What do you coach in that? First, is that a real problem? And if it is a real problem, how do you deal with it?
Yes, it's a real problem because the conversation often goes like this. Rick, you're the CRO or the CEO or the head of sales. May I ask you, how do you feel about the fact that you have an untrustworthy sales force? And the response is, no, we don't. Our sales force is very highly trusted. And I would say, may I ask, do you trust salespeople in general? Well, no, but our sales force is highly trustworthy. Says who? Because your customers are probably relating to them like every other sales team, unless you are being very intentional about how you teach and coach and develop the skills of your sales team so that the experience is these are integrous, lovely, warm, interesting, trustworthy people, and their actions match my expectations. And they don't just keep their promises. I said earlier that we deserve trust when we keep our promises, but it's not enough because people will judge you on their expectations over and above your promise, even though they haven't shared them. I call it the responsible promise habit to say, Rick, here's my promise, X, Y, and Z, but may I ask, what else do you trust me to do? Or what else do you expect me to do? Because I want to know what hidden expectations there are so I can say, well, I can't meet A, I can meet you halfway on B, and C, of course, I'll do that in a second. Just think about what a competitive advantage you have in the domain of trust if you have the courage to ask about expectations and include them in your promise as appropriate. You now have, for the first time, the chance to take a prospect's expectations and my promises and close the gap. So there's so much to do in this realm of how we make promises. Just think about the size of the promises we make. A lot of sellers show up meeting one, and they make these enormous promises, and then they wonder why no one wants to buy from them. That's like showing up and saying, Rick, I've got the lottery numbers to Friday night's lottery. It's $1 billion. And I'll sell it to you for 100 million. You'd say, get out of here, Andrew. Because that promise is unrealistically big for the relationship trust we have.
Yeah, boy, does this one relate. For the first 20 years of my career, I sold technology. And I do happen to have a master's in technology. But as a salesperson, I would never say that because that was a promise too big that I'm a salesperson and I have expertise in technology. People wouldn't believe me. There was no way I could make that conversation and be in integrity in the eyes of my buyer. Now, if to your point, if I demonstrated that I could do it, then they didn't care whether I had the degree or not. They just cared that I demonstrated something that was valuable to them. But to tell them how cool I was because I had a master's degree in systems planning, that was dead on arrival.
Yeah.
But when you demonstrated you could help them solve problems and that you could follow through and you could organize your team to support them, they loved that, but they didn't need to know I had a degree to do that.
I wish I could underline everything you just said, because I often say to young and old sellers, there's nothing less passionate than someone who says they have passion. There's nothing less trustworthy than someone who says, trust me. There's no one less competent feeling than someone who says, I've got all the competence in the world. So stealing your line, trustworthiness, passion, competence are better revealed than spoken about, demonstrated rather than promised.
Now, I'd like to talk, I mean, you and I know we could go forever, but the helping people understand the unspoken expectations. Again, I'm almost back to your classroom, and I'm imagining the people in the seats when you tell them they need to do this, that this is an important part. Do people start to squirm and look the other way? And
it's sometimes a small revolt, because the answer I get back is, it's not fair. If I do what I say I'm going to do, and I tell the truth, and I have good intentions, then I deserve to be trusted. And I say, you're right. And I wish that we lived in a fair world, but do you want to whine about it, or be angry about it, or resist it? Or do you want to use what we know to be true? Because here's the opportunity. The one human with the courage to say, here's my promise. And I know we live in a world where people have not met their promises. And knowing that, you probably have expectations that maybe you haven't thought to share, haven't been asked to share, or maybe they're not even in your consciousness.
Yep.
Here's a great example. I promise you a report on Friday morning. It's a weak promise in the first place, because I should tell you 8 a.m., how it sound, etc. But how many of us have had a promise made to us for an 8 a.m. delivery on Friday morning, knowing we need it for the board meeting at 10 o'clock? And on Thursday, we're anxious because we don't know whether it's going to be delivered or not.
Right.
Then 8 a.m. comes, and my teammate comes in and actually delivers it, and I'm still grumpy because I spent a night anxious that it wouldn't happen. And that is a ridiculously unfair thing to do to somebody else. Yet we do it all the time, and our expectations change all the time. So I make you a promise on Monday, the world's changed by Thursday, you've got new expectations, and then I deliver on Friday, and you're like, what are you doing? So what I found to be a ruthlessly good practice is, whenever I make a promise, firstly, make a clean one. What will I do, by when, and how, when I'll give you updates, and exactly the conditions that I propose will satisfy you, and get a firm yes from you. And then I say, Rick, what else do you expect me to do? What else do you trust me to do? And most of the time I get the answer, nothing, Andrew. So I may see the conversation and say, would you like an update on Tuesday as well? Why, yes, I would. Thank you. Do you want it in black ink and blue ink? I didn't think of that. Thank you. And so I dig for it. And when people hear me say that, they say, Andrew, you're creating work for yourself. And I'm saying, notice that if you don't do that, you deliver it on Friday and you miss an expectation, A, you'll have to redo it probably, or B, you'll have lost trust and you won't even know it's happened. And as Stephen Covey so beautifully said, business proceeds at the speed of trust.
Oh, I love that, because one of the critical parts is help add value to people that they don't even know they need. And when you go through that process, you're helping them identify, and then both of you clarify what this is and where the value really is. and you're helping them imagine just the whether it's the color of the ink, or whether it's bound, or whether it's, do you want the digital file, or do you need it in a PDF document as well as the handout? All of those things, I'm guessing, and I know you are a research guy, the research would say that increases the trust and the value being transferred.
Yes. And I'm so glad you raised that, because we spoke about heads of sales and heads of businesses assuming their sales force is trustworthy. And of course, it's not unless you do something special. But I would make this economic case that in a world of roughly commoditized products, and I know we all think our product is special and unique, but ask customers and they're not so sure that your product is different from the 6 people who were just in my office before you and the 5 who are still to come. So in a world where it's difficult for your product to be, or to be perceived to be different, I would argue that the trustworthiness of your sales force is a premium you can charge for an otherwise commoditized looking product. Said differently, as a buyer, I'm happy to pay you $100 for the product. I'm probably also happy to pay you 110 if it's sold to me by Rick, knowing that Rick will come and be there the day I launch. He will be on speed dial 2 days later and will have told me that 2 days later there'll be some issues, because salespeople can not only make promises about what you'll get, they can help you minimize and anticipate the risks. And there are always risks around a purchase.
Yep.
So there's a lot of value that's added by the salesperson, the conversations they have, the things they say, the stories they tell, independent from the product itself. And I think every business is selling 2 products: the product, the value of the sales team's relationship with customers.
Amen. I won't let clients use the P word, product, because I don't believe anybody can buy a product without the offer that surrounds it, which is that salesperson and, other things that come with it, whatever those things are. Special packaging they didn't ask for, or, I'll let you know on Tuesday that we're still on target. That's part of the offer. And in some industries, the offer is worth more than the product.
Yes, and I must say there is an exception. Some companies, especially early in a industry revolution, have a product that is just so wonderful that clients want to get access to the product despite the salesperson.
Oh, yeah.
I would say, you're not in sales,
Right.
You're in order taking. You have one job: take the order and get out of the way, and go home and say to yourself, I'm the luckiest salesperson in the world.
We can call those fulfillment bubbles.
Yeah.
And when you have a fulfillment bubble, you are taking orders. You are not creating relationships. You are not creating partnerships. You are not even creating great value. You are just doing a transaction.
And I'm sure you've seen this in many industries. There was a first mover, a most innovative, and they did take orders for a while. And at some point, competition floods in, the second mover catches up, and then the sales force that has the habits of order taking is suddenly asked to be competitive, phenomenal, trustworthy salespeople. And that transition is very difficult. And dare I say, many of today's unicorns are struggling with exactly that problem.
I have, and we're starting to run out of time, but I can name names that when I was in technology sales, where somebody had the fulfillment bubble, and a salesperson back then, $500,000 was a great income, and they made $500,000 a year until the bubble burst, and then literally 3 years later they couldn't get a job because they had no skills, and they expected a big paycheck for taking orders, and that job doesn't exist on purpose.
Yeah. And I'm not so sure I'd say no skills. They maybe just had the skills which were a fit for order taking. They're different from the skills to help another human being make progress in their lives.
Well said. Well said. And yeah, making progress in other people's lives was not part of their equation.
Right.
When you're in a fulfillment bubble, it doesn't need to be. So, which is too bad. So we're down to the end. You know, again, we could do two more. But I'd love to have you just reflect on the trustworthy profession of sales and tell us what organizationally we should be thinking about, both for the person and then for the team and the company, because I don't think many companies think about the value that that trustworthy salesperson can bring into their equation. And I'm guessing, and you, if you have research, mention it here, that that trustworthy salesperson over the long term gets that $10 extra that you talked about, that additional margin, because from the buyer's frame of reference, they're really receiving value beyond the physical nature or the digital nature of the product. So tell us how we should think about our world going forward.
Yeah. I believe that trust is the genesis of a premium you can charge over the market, a shorter sales cycle,
Yep.
a higher close rate, and a higher than likely renewal down the line. All beautiful, powerful, value-driving metrics. And so I think the higher level question is, in every industry, there's a fastest, a cheapest, an oldest, a biggest, one of these superlatives that defines their competitive mountaintop. But might you choose to be the company known to be the most trustworthy in your industry? And I would argue it's not a mountaintop occupied at all in many industries. And the one who plants their flag in it and lives to earn that flag planting has a sustainable competitive advantage that drives through to a higher margin and value in their company. Is it easy? No. But is it possible to claim and then actually earn the title most trustworthy company? Absolutely.
And as you're saying that, I'm realizing that when you've achieved that, you probably have optimized your people, because people would like to get up in the morning and say, I'm a most trusted professional in the industry. I work for a company that's trusted and believed and honored, and we make money. I have a career for the rest of my life. And to your original three things, I'm going to be able to take care of my family. I'm going to be able to continue to develop myself, and I'm in a really good place.
Yeah. And Rick, I'm sure neither of us would be doing this today if we had $1 for every time someone had said to us, I don't want to sell something that I don't believe in. By which they're saying, I want to trust my company, my product, and the way they support me and my family. So you're absolutely right. The two things come together.
Well, Andrew, this has been terrific. And do you have any last word for us? We've got about 2 minutes before we've got to be done.
I would say that trust seems obvious, and there's a lot of common sense wisdom around it. And I challenge people to look at the research, because it turns out to be surprisingly counterintuitive. And in the research of trust is the opportunity for a magnificent competitive advantage.
Very cool. And for those of you who are watching this, remember, he teaches in the School of Actuary. So when he says those numbers, he means it. But I want to thank all of you for joining us. This is the second in this series. Just remember, there's a first, and if you missed it, you want to go back and get it, because it's really good. So Andrew, thank you for being here today, and maybe we'll do it again.
Right, I'd love that. And Rick, thank you for trusting me to listen to my views. That's an extraordinary honor.
I love it when people live what they say.